Hello again and welcome to part 3. In this section we're going to cover balancing your scope, and a little later on I'm hoping that I'll show you something that will make you scratch your head a little bit. First of all, let me just introduce you to the very latest in living room furniture, which is this. This is the 200p Skywatcher on the NEQ6. And also at this stage, let me point out the order that I would have done everything in, which is I would have taken my mount outside. When I placed my mount down, I would normally have a quick look through the polar scope and just get Polaris in the field of view of my scope, because I know then that when I've got everything together I'm not having to make great big movements. Then I would have put my scope on and my weights on and everything before I start to polar align. At that point I would probably balance and then polar align before I get started. So what we're going to do, as I say in this one, is we're going to cover balancing. Now I just need to point out something about my particular scope that you may not have, just a little feature that I've added, and we'll show you that and then come back to the actual balancing. Okay, the extra part that I want to introduce you to is this. Now what this is an extra ring on the scope of the same type that my normal rings are made out of, and basically the bolt has been taken out of the hinge mechanism on it. The ring has been countersunk and countersunk bolts fitted in, the same with this ring that's on the actual mount. Now what happens is that I leave my telescope rings fairly slack. This ring, the extra ring, is tight, and what that does is it allows me to rotate my scope without having to adjust any rings or anything. It's just an homemade rotator system, and it works quite well. It's just that I didn't want to start demonstrating things and you're seeing something there that looks a bit alien, but as I said, that's just an homemade rotating system, and for me it works really well. So let's get on to the balancing. Okay, when we get to the actual balancing stage, it's very important that you actually equip your scope with whatever it is that you're going to be using during your session. I know that you swap eyepieces over and everything, but just put an average eyepiece in there. If you've got a fan that fits on the end, fit that on, fit your dew shields on. If you're going to be using a camera the most of the time, then fit your camera. And most of all, make sure that you've taken your cover off the end, your cap, because that will knock your balance out as well. As I say, it's like set your scope up exactly how you're going to be using it, so that we can balance it in that overall sort of setup. Right, so you've now got your scope set up and you've got your eyepiece in or your camera. You've got a fan on there if you have one. You've got the cap taken off the end. Your hood's fitted on. The first thing that we're going to want you to do now, when we're in this position, is to undo your right ascension clutch but hold on to your scope at the same time, because if anything's out of balance it could be that it'll just topple. So keep hold of your scope, support everything, and rotate right ascension so that your weight bar is now parallel with the ground, and lock your right ascension up. The next thing we want to do is again hold on to your scope and loosen your declination clutch and rotate your scope so that is also parallel to the ground. So that now if you were looking up from above down onto your mount, you actually see a letter T. Your weight bar making the stick of the T and your telescope making the top. And that's the position we need to be in to start with. Now what we need to do is support your scope again, loosen your declination clutch, and then slowly start to let go of your scope. And you can see at this point we're heavy on that end. Now under normal circumstances what you would do is loosen both of your rings up and just slide your scope a little bit in the rings, or sometimes you may want to just like move your dovetail down your mount a little bit. Obviously I do it a little bit differently because of the rotator ring that I showed you earlier. So all I need to do is loosen my rotator ring and then start to just pull the scope through little by little until eventually we should get some sort of balance. Now what I like to do when I've got the balance like this is I just press up and down like so, and you find that the amount of travel, you can actually fine tune that balancing a little bit. If it tends to stay where you push it, you can see that that end is still very slightly heavy, so we'll just pull back a tiny little bit more like so and tighten that ring, and that is the declination axis balanced. You think? What we're going to do now is we're going to show you something. This, for all intents and purposes, is now balanced, but is it? Because if we now rotate the scope to a vertical position, oh dear, we're not balanced at all. The reason being, and why that works, is because when we rotate the telescope into the vertical axis, we're actually changing the centre of gravity of the whole thing, and now it's extremely heavy on the end opposite the mirror, and yet when we were on the horizontal it's balanced. For all intents and purposes we do have a balance there. As soon as we go vertical, and that's a big amount of imbalance there. How do we fix it? Well, this is the part that makes you scratch your head a little bit, because what we do is we actually take our scope and rotate it in the mount, and we rotate until we get balance like that. And now when we go to the horizontal we're balanced, when we go to the vertical we're balanced. So now everything's balanced up. Now why does that happen? Well, it's quite simple really. If we rotate the scope again so that you can see, what we've got is we've got a focuser and we've got a finder mount all sticking out off the actual tube, which means that when it's rotated you're changing this centre of balance in this area of the scope here. And like I said, if you rotate and balance on the vertical, as well as on the horizontal, you'll find that you've got a much more finely balanced system. And like I said, at the end of the day, everybody tends to balance on the horizontal, but the fact of the matter is, how often do you use your scope in the horizontal? 9 times out of 10 it's pointing at sort of this angle, where it's going to be out of balance if you haven't done a vertical balance as well. It's just something that I thought might make a few people scratch their heads. That it's actually something I showed to my 17-year-old daughter, and she was, you know, scratching her head, which I know she's blonde, but she's actually very bright. Right, so once we've done that and we've balanced the declination, lock your declination off, keeping your scope on the horizontal, and this time loosen your right ascension. Now what I'm going to do at this point is I'm just going to change camera angles for you so that you can see better. Right, now that we've moved things about a little bit and you can see a little bit better, the next thing we're going to do is balance right ascension. Now what we do again is support either the telescope end, depends if you sort of prefer left or right handed operation, but support the end that's nearest to you and release, because again if one end's too heavy it's going to just bang down on you, especially if it's over heavy. Now what we're going to do next is just balance this RA. As you can see, we're actually weight heavy there, which means that we then move the weight towards the scope like so, and check again. Now we're almost there, and again what I like to do is I like to just give a little push in either direction, and you can, if you measure sort of with your eye the amount of travel, we can see that we're still very slightly weight heavy. So again, move over and try again. And we're about there. Right, as far as balancing is concerned, that's our scope balanced. and for visual work that'd be perfectly alright. But there are a couple of ideas with regards to imaging and setting your balance that could have an effect, and that is that a lot of imagers prefer to make the weight end just very slightly heavy. So that will mean just moving the weights out just that little bit, and on the telescope end they like to make the camera end just that little bit heavy. And the reason for that being is the gearing system in your mount may have that little bit of play between the teeth in your gears. Now if everything's balanced, that means that this axis, which is your telescope axis, can actually, it's quite free to play about within that gap, and obviously this is like greatly exaggerated. But if you weight this side and take it slightly off balance, what it's going to do is that gearing then is going to be, if you like, fighting back against the drive. It's going to be putting pressure back on it, which means that the gears will stay in a tighter mesh. You know, the slack is still there if you like, but because it's biased weight wise, it's trying to push back against the gear that's driving it, which means that you tend to get quite tighter trackings. You know, and like there's, I mean, you can go even further and fine tune your mount and take any slop out of it and what have you, but that again is you know, for other tutorials. And that's about it for balancing. And like I said with the one, I hope I haven't made you scratch your head with that one, because you know it's a bit of a strange one. And that's about it. So once again, thanks for watching.